Good afternoon, everybody. We're really pleased to be back among our Texas friends. And let me just take a moment and explain what we want to accomplish this afternoon. There's been a ton of change happening as a result of the pandemic. That hardly needs to be said because we've all been living it. But there's an interesting thing about change. It presents new opportunities. And that's the Carpe Geo thing, seizing those moments of opportunity, however they might occur, to do great things with GIS. Now, there are going to be three parts to this presentation. First, we want to introduce you to a set of ideas called the Great Localization and use that as a framework to explore a few specific things we see changing. What we want to do is help you recognize these as new opportunities, give you some new ideas on how you can apply GIS. Then the second part will be an example showing how AppGeo rose to the moment for one specific aspect of the pandemic. And finally, we want to use the last portion of this hour together to invite you to share your stories. So pay attention, folks. This means you have an assignment today. As you watch and listen to the first two parts, we want you to be thinking about how you, in your personal life and in the organization where you work, have been dealing with the pandemic and whether the thoughts and examples we'll share with you are relevant to your situation. What's been similar? What's been different? The aim here is to help all of us feel awakened to the issues facing our society right now and how each of us as GIS professionals can help deal with those issues. We'll want you to weigh in with your thoughts on those things in that last part. Now, Kate and I will be delivering this presentation together in a conversational format where we'll flip back and forth and share comments with each other along the way. Most of the slides we'll show are just images to complement the dialogue. We hope you find this more engaging and personal than a typical slide deck presentation. Kate?
Sure. Thank you, Bill. I think this will be fun and hopefully thought-provoking today. One thing I wanted to point out is that we made one slight change to the title of our presentation. We added a question mark after the Great Localization. Really, we struggled with this a little bit. The more we prepared for this presentation, observing and processing and reading and talking, all about how our world and our lives have changed so dramatically in the last 8 months, the more we really deeply acknowledge that we are far from experts on the subject, and we certainly don't want to pretend to have all the answers. So we ask a lot of questions today instead of providing all the answers. We're really attracted to the idea of localization as a framework for understanding, and we hope you will be too. Because in the end, aren't we all just trying to make sense of our experiences and imagine what our futures might be like? We first heard about the Great Localization from our friend and colleague Bert Gramberg over at the Metropolitan Planning Office in Salt Lake City. The MPO is responsible for transportation planning throughout the region in the Salt Lake City metro area. And Bert was our guest on a webinar last month. And he introduced us to this concept that was coined by his boss, Ted Knowlton. Now, Ted describes what's happening from the pandemic as the Great Localization. And we've borrowed some of his ideas today, and he gave us our blessing to do so. We've, of course, put our own spin on them a little bit, though. So what Ted discovered when he looked at a variety of data pre-pandemic to in the midst of the pandemic, when he looked at travel patterns in the Salt Lake metro area, it's not surprising that trips for retail, trips for work, freeway traffic volumes, ridership on their public transit systems, air emissions from transport, these were all down. I think we were all seeing this in the news, that the environment was the big winner here in the pandemic. But at the same time, bicycle trips and especially trips to open spaces were up substantially. And you can see that in the graph here. So open space trips up 160%, bicycle trips up 40%. What he concluded is that the pandemic has created perfect conditions that really favor people staying close to home within their local community and seeking out ways to better enjoy their time locally, by visiting parks or biking and walking in their neighborhoods or focusing their shopping locally. Of course, one of the biggest drivers of this change is the fact that so many people were and are working and schooling from home. The time and money saved from commuting to work has enabled many people to improve the quantity and the quality of their leisure time. And that suggests, there's been something of a silver lining to all of the restrictions that have been put in place. But where it gets even more interesting is when he looks ahead and forecasts what he thinks the new sort of post-pandemic, the new equilibrium will be, maybe even 2 years down the line. You see that he has a low and high projections for each row, so that most likely the outcome is something in between those values that you see here. These forecasts show that there will be some long-term shifts in the urban transportation sector. He projects no increase, or at best, a marginal recovery of transit trips and freeway volumes, but sustained higher levels of bicycle trips and open space trips. So in effect, he's projecting that we'll be trading longer downtown destination trips for more local trips. And these forecasts, if he's right about this, they really reinforce the concept of the Great Localization and suggest that some of these changes are really here to stay. Remember, Ted's context is just transportation. He's a transportation planner. But I think we can safely say that similar patterns of long-term change will happen in other sectors, maybe housing, education, retail, so on. So it's a long list.
Yeah, I really like that great localization concept, Kate. And I especially like that it connects changes to what we value in our communities. I've certainly seen that same pattern emerging where I live in upstate New York. And just to cite a single simple example, my wife and I have started to take walks nearly every day with our two dachshunds through the village of Altamont. We actually live a little ways outside of the village, so we make a quick drive down the hill from our house and we park at the village library, now occupying a building that was originally the train station that you see featured on this slide. From there, we can stroll the sidewalks in the village before dinner. Now, this wasn't possible before the pandemic because my wife had a 40-minute commute from the college campus where she works. So in the past, she'd arrive home after work and we'd just get started on dinner. Now, the time she's saving by working from home is what we've repurposed for our walks through the village. It's been a positive change in our daily pattern.
Altamont sure looks like it's right out of a storybook there, Bill. It's beautiful. I too have been enjoying some bonus time, I guess you could say, as I skip the commute into Boston every day and work from home. But I think it's also really important for us to remember that not everyone is enjoying the same silver lining. A lot of the reductions that we're seeing in travel and this increased, localization, these are due to job losses in some cases, or the need for parents to stay home and care for and even educate their children that are no longer traveling to school. So there are a lot of reasons this is happening. And not all of them are positive. At AppGeo, we had about a third of our staff already working from home before the pandemic. And now that we're all working from home, we're really starting to rethink our need for downtown office space. And it's pretty ironic because we had just moved into a beautiful new space only a few months before the pandemic. And just out of curiosity, we were hoping to use the polling tool today and ask all of you, how many of you expect to be primarily working from home in the next 6 months?
There it is. Hey.
Oh, okay, interesting. Okay, so 65% fully working from home in the next 6 months, and another 30% partially working from home. Wow. So really, it's a very small percentage that are expecting to be back in the office. And that really aligns with what we're seeing all over the country and experiencing ourselves. I think I'm always surprised when I have a video call with someone and they're sitting in a professional office there. Very interesting. So, let's take a look at some of the impacts from this move toward localization. Some of these shifts are causing us to question what changes are temporary and which might be more permanent, like working from home, perhaps. And here the topic of values will really rise in importance. Let's start with what happened when we first had to shut things down in March. As we all know, what literally happened overnight was that our transportation systems, no one was going anywhere. Um, and we'll call this, for the sake of this little demo here, mobility, to include all aspects of transportation. And it all came virtually to a standstill. We discovered this powerful visualization on the Mapbox platform, where they collected movement data from mobile devices and created this cool data set that can be analyzed to look exactly how mobility has changed during this period. So take a look at the City of London here. The animation is showing us how often people are moving outside of a 100-meter block, basically a city block within the city. And you see how dramatically it drops between February, where it's at full peak, and then April, where it's a ghost town. So there's February moving into March, moving into April. It's pretty amazing. And Mapbox is, FYI, making this data publicly available for the UK and the US. So if you are interested in exploring this mobility data, I think you can get your hands on it. On this side of the Atlantic, there was also a recent article in the Boston Globe where they analyzed transportation data and determined that the average Boston commuter has gained 7 hours per week working from home. That's almost a full workday there. That's a lot of time, and that sounds, just in line with what you're experiencing in your household, isn't it, Bill?
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting coincidence because we live at the outer edge of the Albany, New York metro area, and my wife's commute was actually heading further away from the city, basically a drive through the countryside to her office campus. It very different situation than commuters in heavy Boston or Austin traffic or on crowded trains. So what we're already seeing is that mobility is rebounding, and that's pretty clear from the Mapbox visualization we just looked at. I've also heard that traffic congestion in Austin is now back up to about 80% of the level where it was before the pandemic. So I think the big question a lot of us have is whether we'll retain some of the traffic reduction for the long term, because a lot of people are seeing the benefit and time savings over what they were experiencing before the pandemic, and they may be reluctant to return to pre-pandemic habits and routines. I think this raises questions about what we really value in our local communities. The Great Localization trend would suggest that we are placing greater value on things that lead to a better quality of life close to where we live. And we may be willing to trade off some of our former values to get it. Things like having more lanes of highways built to support a commute into downtown if we aren't expecting to commute downtown in the future. And to cite a Texas example, one of our AppGeo colleagues who works in Austin recently told us about two ballot initiatives, Prop A and Prop B, that would provide funding for light rail, bike paths, sidewalks, and urban trails in Austin. That seems to us to be totally consistent with this idea of the Great Localization. And it's pretty solid evidence that public opinion, which is really an expression of our values, may be starting to shift. It'll be really interesting to see if those initiatives are approved by the voters next week. Texas seems to have a bit of a habit of being a trailblazer, and we saw that last year with the passage of Prop 8 that actually amended your state constitution to permanently fund flood mitigation efforts, including the GIS data needed for those projects. And coincidentally, we did a webinar just 2 weeks ago with Richard Wade explaining how Texas has been a trailblazer with the imagery content program, which we just heard Gayla and her team talking about.
Bill, what you were just describing about how we value our communities rings so true with me. It really resonates, and I've been thinking about my own community quite a bit. But I also think about the potential geographic freedom that this new model might afford us. And let's explore for a moment, what if we're not just working from home, but we're working from anywhere? One of the questions that arises from Ted Knowlton's ideas in the Great Localization is that long-term patterns of where we choose to live might be changing, particularly for those of us who continue to work remotely. How will this change our settlement and our housing patterns? How will it impact urban real estate markets as people look for more space with fewer people and greater affordability? What will those trade-offs be like? You know, another big question on everyone's mind is how will schools be impacted in the long term? We see an extreme example of that here in this article that was published in the New York Times a couple of months ago. And it's probably more common than we imagine. For those of you who know college age kids, perhaps you were already aware. But this article featured a group of college students that were enrolled at Grinnell College in Iowa, but they had decided to rent a house in Park City, Utah for the year so they could live near the ski areas and still attend their classes in Iowa remotely. It's really the rise of off-campus housing, as they say. And examples of like this, just like this, are popping up everywhere. You know, for years, higher ed institutions tried to get online programs to take off, and it was largely without success. There was a bit of a stigma to the model. People were reluctant to embrace it. But now, where we choose to live and work and go to school, it really all seems up for grabs right now. And this raises some really interesting questions about how we value and spend our time and the extent to which we are still local.
Yeah, Kate, I think this is just fascinating. And, you know, the more I think about it, the more it looks like we have two opposing forces at work. On one side, we have the Great Localization, where there's an increasing focus on amenities close to home, walkable, bikeable, near me access to things that we value, which seems to be concentrating our attention on all things local. And at the same time, our ability to stay close to home depends on being part of a connected digital world built on this global internet. That's what allows us to work and access school remotely, conduct online commerce that relies on global supply chains, and just take advantage of the anytime, anywhere aspect of the internet. It's really fascinating how we have a hyper-local phenomena being enabled by globalization. You know, those are two very different forces based on very different sets of values, and yet they rely on each other and they're happening in tandem. And just to point out something that may be obvious, maybe not, but the most essential characteristic of each of those forces, local and global, is that they are at their core geographic issues, spatial issues. And that's why I think that's really interesting for those of us in the GIS profession, because it's helping us to see this rich new range of opportunities that we can seize. Our way of viewing the world through a spatial lens is letting us be problem finders while others are still struggling to make sense of the issues. So let's shift our perspective now from using the Great Localization as a framework to help understand the changes we see happening with the pandemic and consider how these changes matter to GIS professionals. The question is, why should you care? Well, what we're seeing is that the pandemic is sort of like a magnifier. It's focusing our attention and highlighting the gaps in public sector services and information. That magnifier is helping us as GIS professionals to see that these Carpe moments of opportunity are presenting themselves. And one of the first things we see is how critical it is to be connected, to be part of this online connected world. And that means everyone needs to have access to broadband at home. Now, we all know this was a problem before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, this digital divide has created real hardship for those without broadband. The rest of us have all been able to shift to online alternatives for the essentials in our lives: access to work, to school, to access to healthcare and information, and much, much more. Those without broadband have suffered disproportionately. And much of it is related primarily to where they live. So it's a geographic problem, a spatial problem. And guess whose realm that is? Now, we could have a full presentation this afternoon just on what's happening with broadband and the changes taking place right now to have better, more granular broadband mapping for the country. We don't have time for that, but I do want you to know that the FCC is in the process right now of implementing this new federal law called the Broadband Data Act that's going to modernize broadband data collection and mapping. So starting next year, we're going to have broadband data at the individual address location. So we'll finally have the granularity we need to support good public policy decisions so we can close that digital divide. That's something for all of you to pay close attention to because it's a great example of connecting local data, addresses, to a national problem. And it's GIS through and through. The second thing I want to point out that the magnifier is revealing is that now, more than ever, we really need high quality local data to support things like home delivery and public safety, emergency response, community planning, and lots of other examples. So the question is, how good is your local data? Do you have a complete address point layer, parcels, zoning, emergency service zones? Are those layers complete? Are they really being kept up to date? Let's just cite one example out of many, many possible ones. But if you have a GIS layer of business locations for your community and you update them once a year, which is fairly typical for a lot of GIS data, is that still useful now in the pandemic? What I'm really trying to point out is you're going to need great data, local data now and well into the future for things like NextGen 911, to help community residents find COVID testing sites, find vaccination sites when the vaccines are available, polling places, food pickup points, and much, much more. And the need for those types of local GIS-based information services aren't going to go away after the pandemic. So this is a great moment of opportunity to take stock of your data and what needs to happen to it to really bring it up to speed. And that magnifier is also showing the need for information delivery services architected at the hyperlocal level. So what do I mean by that? I mean finding answers to questions that will serve you locally. It's the near me phenomena. And I think the best way to show you is with a new ad that Google has just put out. Aaron?
When I was in high school, this was a theater I came to quite often.
Well, your friends, they came from out of town. It was a new kind of neighborhood.
The support we've had over the last 2 months has been amazing.
I have a soft spot for local places.
It's not just a work environment. Everyone here is family.
Well, now your friends were dancing on.
Gonna go ahead and support him, get my haircut, leave a big tip.
Like something's wrong. It was a
If we focus on our local communities, we can find a way to get through this together.
If you are ready to open your heart and your home, check us out.
Get out and about and support our local community.
We thought for sure that we were done, and this town said not today.
kind of neighborhood.
I never get tired of seeing that ad. It's very cute. And you know what also strikes me is you're talking about the pandemic being a magnifier, but I also think it's served as an accelerator for innovation and change. We've seen it in the rapid development and testing of COVID therapies. We've seen it in using AI to triage patients. We're all experiencing it right in this moment here, the much improved digital and virtual experiences for us all. You know, for example, the rise of Zoom, many of us had probably never heard of it before, and how quickly it caused other video meeting software like WebEx and Google and Microsoft, it caused them all to improve and gave us all a better digital experience. You know, businesses and citizens are under a lot of stress and uncertainty. I think we've all seen businesses shut down. That's heartbreaking. In our local communities. You know, so many people are dealing with unemployment and food insecurity and uncertain government relief benefits and spotty access to testing and healthcare services and ever-changing policies on COVID restrictions. It's hard to keep up. It's all changing so rapidly and in ways we never anticipated, never even imagined before the pandemic. Government agencies are operating with really tight budgets and some with aging legacy systems and of course many new demands on their services. finding new ways to do business, like restaurants doing curbside pickup or home delivery, or improved online transactions and experiences, and other innovations. These are all the name of the game now, and organizations and businesses have had to adapt really quickly to survive.
Yeah, that's right, Kate. So what we want to do now is shift to the second part of our presentation this afternoon, and what we want to do is show you an example of how AppGeo has applied these things in dealing with one specific aspect of the pandemic, and that's food insecurity. Now, the hit on our economy from the pandemic left a large number of people out of work as businesses either closed or reduced their capacity. In addition, there are lots of vulnerable people, especially seniors, who've had to stay indoors and away from the public space to reduce their exposure to the virus. Now, we had people relying on food assistance before the pandemic, but the combination of new factors, unemployment, and so many new needy folks layered on top has created a huge surge in demand for that most basic necessity, food. Now, the images we're showing you on the screen now are from a recent article in the New York Times Sunday magazine, and the photos speak for themselves about the heartbreaking reality of families struggling to have enough to eat. Some of these families lack the basics: a functioning kitchen, a table to sit at, a yard, or even a way to get to the places where they can get food. And let's not forget that this is a problem being solved locally by thousands of small food pantries and food banks based in local communities and staffed mainly with volunteers. You can think of food insecurity as one of the issues on the flip side of the Great Localization. So it's not just about sidewalks and biking and enjoying local parks. More and more, we need to solve our problems locally. And there may be no better example of that than food pantries.
Yeah, that article was really sobering, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to get a real picture of how food insecurity is impacting the entire nation. The reality of the food insecurity issue, it really hit home for us at AppGeo. It spoke to us. It spoke to our values about being good stewards in the communities where we live and where we work. And it spoke to the profession that generates our livelihood. As Bill said, all of these things are spatial as well. We were seeing firsthand how the local food banks in and around Boston were struggling to deal with this surge in demand, and the reality that not everyone in need could actually get themselves to a food pantry. We decided to do something about using the tools that we know best. And what resulted was our Bring Food app that aims to help food pantries plan and manage their deliveries. So we wanted to share with you a message from Rich Grady. He's our president and has led the company for many years. In this video here, he's in the midst of the beautiful salt marshes of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And he's explaining our company perspective on values and how that led us to create Bring Food.
Hey, I want to say a big hello to my friends in Texas. I miss seeing you in person. I always look forward to the Texas GIS Forum. It's a source of food for thought on the ways we can apply geospatial thinking and tools to problem solving. We all know there are a lot of problems out there that need solving, and our way of thinking does bring a new perspective to the table often. I also enjoy the thoughtful work that students in colleges and universities across Texas are doing. Keep it up and keep it coming. Bring it on. The forum has also been a source of food for the soul, the good things we've all done helping the communities we live and work in, which these days pretty much are the same place, right? And I think along with those places where we live and work, we need a spiritual place for sanctuary, for inspiration, for guidance in an uncertain world. Such a place can prompt us to reflect on who we are and what's important. And when we do that, often we know what to do in the face of uncertainty. It puts us in the right frame of mind to know that it's always the right time to do the right thing. For me, Bring Food came from that place and from that frame of mind. But it was the collective action and abilities and willingness and passion of my colleagues at AppGeo that brought it to fruition. I tip my hat to them. They made Bring Food a reality. And I know they're with me on this. We were inspired and humbled by the work being done by food banks and food pantries in communities all over the country, delivering food day in, day out. And with that food, I think they brought a little happiness, a little humanity, a little hope to people. They made a positive difference in people's lives. And we should all aspire to do that. And we should all tip our hat to them. Let's face it, we're all in this together. And there's work to be done. In for a nickel, in for a dime. Let's do it, Texas. Hook 'em.
Thank you, Rich. Always good for some inspiring words and beautiful scenery there too. And Rich's sentiment is really, really important. You know, none of us can predict the future, but we know that whatever decisions we make will be firmly rooted in our values. I'm really proud to be part of a company that unabashedly puts values first. We've made Bring Food available for free to food banks across the country. And to share a little bit about that experience, we'd also like to share a video clip here from Susan Dorson. She's at a food bank in Arlington, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. And she's talking here with Priya Sankalia. She's one of our AppGeo project managers. And they're describing how they work together to define the requirements and test the application.
Right. Well, when first people started to hear about COVID, and we knew it was maybe on the horizon and becoming an issue, we saw a sudden jump in the need for food. Initially, there was about a 50% increase in the families that were coming to us. And before quarantine started, we were putting together a lot of safety protocols. But as soon as people were told to stay home, we knew we had to make a huge shift. And that shift went from about fewer than 5% of our families we did home delivery to, and suddenly we were jumping to complete home delivery, so 100% home delivery.
So how were you making these deliveries? Did you have volunteers helping out?
So we were very lucky to be able to team up with the Medical Reserve Corps, and they supply a lot of our delivery drivers, which was fabulous because they took care of recruiting and bringing them to us. But the downside was that they came from many different communities, so they didn't necessarily know Arlington. So when you're delivering food and I hand you a random list of addresses, that became an issue pretty immediately.
So when I came to you, you already had a problem, which, we were like ready to solve, and you communicated that to me.
Yeah, I think we've been doing it a couple weeks by the time you contacted me, and I've just been kind of making random routes and handing them out. And so you and I had a conversation, and then I sat down with your team, and I listened to my problem, and within 6 weeks, you gave me the access to the beta application. Oh, it was a really crazy quick turnaround. That was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty amazing because we were in, agile mode. We basically started brainstorming in April, started development late April with, what you had told us. And the beta application was rolled out mid-May. We gave it to you and to two other organizations, Somerville and Chelsea, which was a very hard-hit city in the Boston area. You gave us some, tweaks to make, and we launched the website in July for everybody to access. So what was it like for you to be a tester on this platform, Susan? Because you gave us a lot of insights into how we could change the application.
Right. The whole process was so new to me. I've never kind of been a part of something like that before. And I'm not very technical, so I wasn't sure what I could ask or what I could expect the team to do. But the team always listened to me and said, oh, yeah, that's doable. Or, well, let's think about this possibility. So what was wonderful is I was able to come with all of my thoughts or concerns, and the team was very responsive. And it felt like a collaboration because you were trying to make something useful for people, and I was able to kind of come to you with all the different ideas of things that were affecting our particular community. And we also, I think, discussed some ideas of how large communities might need different things as well. So it was a real team effort, and there were a number of meetings, and then in the end result, I had a wonderful an app to work with, and the process was very smooth, so it was fantastic.
Many thanks to Priya and Susan for that. It's fun to get a reminder of how quickly that all came together. It was a whirlwind project and really exciting to witness. And finally, I would like to ask Erin to give us a quick demo of how the application actually works. So Erin, go for it.
All right, I'm just coming online here. Good, looks like we're working. So I call this the fun part of the presentation because we get to look at technology, and I know we got a lot of fans of that on it. The whole thing's been fun, and I really think Bill and Kate have been doing an awesome job here. But what I'd like to demonstrate is, at the crux of this application, it's about saving these organizations time. As Susan was describing there, it used to take them hours to have to figure out who was going where every single day, and they were always dealing with different people. And one of the main ideas behind Bring Food was to speed that up so they could spend their time actually helping people instead of messing around in Microsoft Excel. So this quote has really resonated with us. What is used to take us hours is now done in under 5 minutes. And in under 5 minutes here, I'd like to quickly show you what this application actually looks like and how it works for those of you who are curious and may have not gotten to see it before. And I'm going to give you the real deal version here, not my pre-recorded one, so we'll have a little bit of fun. So Bring Food starts with submitting lists of addresses, and that can come in a lot of different ways. We have some CSV files here I've populated. And the first step is just teaching the application, what is your data? Because everyone's data is going to come in a little bit differently, and we want it to work seamlessly within the application. So I'm just going to quickly define these headers as we have them come in, like zip code, state. Now this one's kind of interesting, number of boxes, as the application can take into account vehicle capacity in addition to some of the other factors, so like delivery size for number of boxes. Now we have this last column here, drop-off location. That could be an example of a number of additional fields that will make their way into the final results, but not necessarily have an impact on the geocoding. So now that we have set all those up, we can go ahead and hit the sign. Let's see. Oh, I put the wrong one here, and it's caught that. That is the state. There we go. And now it's doing geocoding using the Google geocoding engine. And one thing that's interesting about Bring Food is if there are errors in your data, it will pick it up ahead of time. So, here we see the street name is missing. It would give us a chance to manually go back and say, all right, who was that? And rather than send someone to like incorrect location, or worse, someone doesn't get their food that they need for that week, we have a chance to QA/QC that. So we could say Mass Ave. Let's see if that works better. All right. So here's the interesting part. We've now got all those addresses from an Excel sheet on our map. There are all these different points here. We can zoom in, zoom out, all the way down to the individual house scale if we need to. And we have a couple parameters to play with. The first is just picking where is our distribution center, where is our pantry or food bank that all the pickups are occurring from. I'm going to use a grocery store locally just as our example here. Oops. And what's nice about this is it also has all the Google Places database tapping into. So I just need to type the name. It's picked up the full address there and put a pin on our map. Now we have two strategies we can then pick from: a max route delivery size, so max number of stops, or maximum number of routes. So say we have 5 drivers to work with, we can make sure each of them have a route, and from there hit optimize. Now this is the really cool part. It is now clustering all those points, finding the optimal way for your 5 drivers to reach all of them, and then giving them to you in this color-coded format. So we have, our green team, purple, red that is making the trip over to Boston over here, and then yellow going through Cambridge, Massachusetts. What's additionally interesting is we can zoom in and even, drop into street view if, say, a driver wanted to verify, hey, this right here is where I'm going to be making the delivery. Have that confirmation before you leave for the day. And should our delivery parameters change, we can rerun with a new optimization. Let's say we get some nice big trucks and they're going to hold 20 houses worth of food each, I can re-optimize. And now under that scenario, we only need 3 to cover all those addresses. So very powerful. And from here, we can go ahead and download these back to CSV. If I was to do that and open it up, just to wrap up here, you'd see the driver assignment for each route. There we go. Just a little sluggish. We'll have a driver assignment for each route and their stop order along with the address, and then like that additional information. Ooh, it's up on our top screen. That's why. That additional like drop off location and how many boxes. You could even have like a cell phone number in there, as many of the organizations were confirming with a phone call at the time of the delivery. So, a very lightweight application, but a very robust application. And we've been really excited to kind of bring it to life. And from there, I think we're going to hop back into the slides.
Yeah, thank you very much for that demo, Aaron. I really appreciate you doing it live.
Thanks, Bill.
The decision to create Bring Food was a real Carpe Geo moment for us at AppGeo. It's a great example on a lot of different levels, not the least of which is that it's truly an expression of our company's core values. But I'd also like to point out a few other interesting details. We're a GIS consulting company, and we're used to dealing with clients who know what they want us to build with GIS. For these food pantries, we found ourselves dealing with a user base that is not at all conversant with GIS, and frankly doesn't need to be. For Bring Food, we had to be problem finders, not solvers. In other words, we had to work with users like Susan Dorson, who you saw in that earlier video clip, to find out what they didn't understand and to weed out any assumptions we had coded in there that assumed familiarity with GIS. There were also some technical problems we needed to solve with Bring Food. First, it had to be, and I love this phrase from one of our team members, it had to be ridiculously simple so that volunteers just using basic spreadsheets could easily get the results they need. And even though there are excellent new tools and APIs out there now that we can work with, the out-of-the-box tools still need to be augmented in a lot of cases with our own special sauce. And in this case, we used Google's API for the multi-stop route optimization. But that clustering that you saw happen between geocoding and the route designation was our own algorithm. And that's how we get the addresses that are closest to each other to combine into each route. And we also found out, as Aaron showed you in that demo, that geocoding doesn't always happen cleanly. And any of you that have ever done any geocoding know that that's the case time in and time out. So we needed to provide capability for on-the-fly corrections. And I think that was great that Aaron was able to show that. And as Kate mentioned earlier, we've been sharing Bring Food for free to nonprofit food pantries. We started out with a handful in the Boston area, but now there are organizations all over the country benefiting from Bring Food. And we think this is a great example of shared value. We're able to give back to the communities that have made our business possible in a way that helps them do a better job serving the needy. And that, friends, it really appeals to our core values.
Thank you, Bill. I totally agree with that. And, this has been a really fun exploration this afternoon, and pulling this together and hearing what everyone shared throughout the day. Now it's time to see if everyone was paying attention, because we're ready to turn the tables and ask you for your stories. Now, I warned you up front that we're good at asking questions, but it doesn't mean we have the answers. So, what we'd love to hear from you. What are you observing in terms of impacts from the pandemic? This could be on your work, on your life, in your community. Did any of the ideas from the Great Localization resonate with you? Are you paying attention to your neighborhood more? Are you connecting with your neighborhood in new ways? Any Carpe Geo opportunities out there to seize or to solve or to share? Have you innovated or reinvented your work? What's been your biggest challenge? What are you still struggling with? I think you can use the raise your hand tool in the webinar here, and I believe we can unmute you, or someone can unmute you so you can speak. Or if you prefer to type a message into the chat box, we can read it and share it with the group. And I have a softball for you, Richard, and others at TNRS. You know, what's it been like to pivot and organize this virtual conference instead of doing the live session? Has there been a silver lining?
Yeah, you know, that's been an interesting thing. I think realistically, we had mentioned this at the last quarterly meeting that we had, was when we were doing these things live, Felicia would often ask, you know, should we try to, you know, create a dial-in number or, you know, whatever, so people can come in. I said, no, let's not do that, because we want people to come, because the whole point is the interaction that we have. And I think it's still that, but realistically, when we did our first one back in, I believe it was in July, we went from about 40 to 60 people at the norm to 150 people. And everybody was saying, you know, how wonderful it was. We kind of went online with this, because now they can actually, you know, participate and hear and just be a part of the process, where they felt excluded because we would have these things, you know, on the wrong side of town that they couldn't get to. And, you know, it was all this stuff. So it was this eye opener for us to realize that, you know, it wasn't such a bad idea. People who still want to come and meet in person will do that. But people who just can't do that, but still want to listen to what people are saying, will do that. And so there's a best of both worlds here. And I think even this particular, you know, event that we had today, you know, same sort of thing, allowing people to kind of pick and choose the sessions they wanted to come on. And I've been watching people pop on and off during those sessions, and I thought it was a really great idea. So it was an eye opener for us on how we're doing that. And so even when we do get back together, this will be a part of our process from here on. And so we wouldn't have figured it out until this happened.
Yeah, that's great. Richard, you mentioned folks on the wrong side of town not coming to me, but man, Texas is a big state. I mean, I assume there were people quite remote from Austin that could suddenly participate.
I mean, even from here, we've got people from out of state who are participating, you know, who are probably one of our vendors or you know, something like that, where they just couldn't have done this before. And so it isn't just in the Austin area, it's the region, you know, and people very much appreciated the ability to do that. So yeah, so we learned, absolutely.
Great.
Do we have any other brave souls out there who want to share anything? Has anyone commented?
Kate, I want to kick it off, I think, a little bit. I'm waiting to see if anybody raises their hand, but I do want to raise my hand because Bill touched on it, and I touched on it a little bit in my opening remarks. But you know, when the COVID first hit, you know, the city was kind of like you showed in there on your map, where all of a sudden all of the transportation just kind of went away, and you know, there was this kind of eerie sort of feeling about it all. But now that it's, you know, there's people returning to work, and I think that's a good thing when you can do it. But there's also been talk about, you know, what are you going to do when this thing is over? What are companies going to do? There are some companies saying we're not going to go back the way we were. You know, we're going to be a little bit more in a hybrid mode, or we're going to be whatever. And Bill had mentioned that, you know, or one of you guys mentioned that Austin is back to about 80% of what the traffic was.
Yeah.
And there's a little part of me that's kind of bummed by that. You know, traffic was already so horrific. To some degree, and there's a hope that, you know, businesses start offering more options to work from home, even if they don't have to, simply because, you know, in the time that we're in, why crowd the roads if you don't really have to do that? You know, why start your vehicle and have to drive 45 minutes in and out of town when you can just not have to do that? So I'm real curious to kind of, you know, figure out how things are going to really play out once we're back on 100%. So it will be interesting.
Yeah. You know, you're saying that, Richard, reminds me that, you know, just speaking personally, one of the things that this pandemic has done to us in my family is, you know, we used to just, you needed something, you just automatically hop in the car and head out to get it, and, you know, with very little thought about that. And now we actually do pause and ask ourselves, you know, do I need to make this trip? Is there an alternative way to to meet whatever the need is in the moment. And we're traveling far less and putting hardly any miles on our car. I was trying to remember the last time I gassed up my pickup truck, and I couldn't tell you. It's been several weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's kind of my point. And I mean, I know there's nobody raising their hand, but I'm real interested if anybody else has a thought to that. What's it going to be like in the private sector? The states thinking through their ideas and what they've got going on. But realistically, I'm just real interested to know how this is all going to play out and what's going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
So let me scan around. Anybody want to comment? Don't see anything.
No, there's got to be some brave souls out there. Come on, folks. You've all been living this pandemic. You must all have some reaction to, this concept of the Great Localization and how you see it playing out in your lives or in your work, or what's it feel like to you, and what does it mean to you? What do you think? What do you see looking ahead for how this will impact what you do in GIS? I think this is so much good stuff we could be talking about here. I'd just really love to hear from some of you.
Yeah, let me read one thought from Lila Valencia. Let me see. I have trouble reading small print, but let me see what I can do here. Thank you for sharing the great localization framework and the examples you provided. The example you gave of a college student living in Park City, Utah is really interesting and makes me wonder of how this new freedom to be able to live and work, learn anywhere, from anywhere, may impact population growth in Texas. Currently, half of our growth in Texas comes from migration. Not sure if you have any thoughts on this.
Mm.
Yeah, I know.
Kate?
I know. There's been a lot of. I'm reading it all the time about migration out of cities. So it could be, those in Texas probably want to be in Texas. And I would think that it's probably just a redistribution within the state out of the cities, to places that are more affordable. Cities have always been attractors of people for the jobs, the job opportunities, the economic opportunities, and that constraint is really going away. I mean, we see it. We hired someone that none of us have met. He's a web developer. He's working with us for several months now. None of us have met him in person ever. It's the first time we've ever done that. And we didn't skip a beat in thinking about, we just wanted to hire the best talent, and it almost didn't matter where the person was. You get into time zone challenges, can you overlap working hours? And we've had others, I must say it's especially amongst the young people who have a lot of freedom to move around. But, one woman who works with us has lived in 4 different states since she's worked for us. So I do think that will be a big, we'll see a lot of that where, it's not about just necessarily choosing where you want to live, but it's just this mobility of where you live too. You can, live in one place for the summer and one place for the winter and maintain the same job the whole time.
Yeah. I want to add something to that. Is one of the aspects that is really critical in that is access to sufficient broadband. And so, I'm sure there are still parts of Texas that are not well served. One of the things we learned in my family is that the broadband connection that we had at the start of the pandemic wasn't sufficient with my wife and I both working from home, and we had at the start of the pandemic my high school senior daughter doing remote schooling, and our connection just didn't have enough bandwidth for the 3 of us to be sharing, so we upgraded. But luckily, we live in an area where we do have the option to upgrade. But any of these decisions about work from anywhere are limited by not just is basic service available, but is service sufficient for conducting online meetings and video and all that, which is often greater than what just meets that basic are you served or not served definition that the FCC uses. So we see that as a real big factor in how this migration is going to happen.
Absolutely. There's a great I guess observation from Nancy Hager I want to read. It says, I like the decreased population and increased wildlife that we are seeing in many different areas. Hope we can make it last. And that reminds me of something I read not too long ago about how the songbirds are actually, what's the right word, singing more quietly because there's not as much competing noise. Like, I mean, wow. This is a true study where they actually took the volume of particular animals and found out that with the decreased traffic and decreased population in certain areas, that even the wildlife have quieted down just in the way they sing and do their whatever they do. So I thought that
nature might be the real winner.
So Aaron, did you have something you wanted to add?
To close it out, you know, folks at AppGeo have a habit of cooking up ideas in their free time and then making, you know, interesting projects, interesting maps. And it just occurred to me, you know, when we're going into the winter here, and I've been thinking, all right, well, how am I going to spend all this time? Normally, I love being outside, but it's getting colder by the day. And one thought is, you know, 7 hours a week. As GIS people, we're curious and we have, you know, passion for what we do. Take some of that time and invest it into, you know, that project in GIS you've been putting off, something interesting that you just do for fun, whether it be learning a new skill or sharing something or, you know, experimenting with all this data that's now out there, like that Mapbox data, for example. And, you know, after a couple months of that, you might be shocked at some of the creative things you can come up with and share with the greater GIS community. So I set that as a challenge to all of you out there, and we'll see what you come up with in a couple months. But I see a great opportunity to leave it off with today.
So
Aaron, did you want to make sure everyone knew where to find more info on Bring Food as well?
Absolutely. So we have a website set up, bringfood.care. You can also Google Bring Food. I think you'll find us that way. And you can sign up an organization in your community or forward it to an organization in your community. And again, totally free for all those qualifying nonprofits. So we hope that you can spread it. We have a handful of groups in Texas using it now, and we hope to add a whole bunch more.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to thank you guys from AppGeo, Bill and Kate, Aaron. Thank you guys so much. That was a fascinating application to see run, and just a great way you guys did this. I felt like I was actually in the conversation, except I actually wanted to join in half the time. And you couldn't see my head nodding and everything else that y'all were saying. So very effective. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. You guys are great, and we're great to have this kind of relationship with you guys. And so thanks for everything you've done and being a part of this being a part of this meeting. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard.
It's our pleasure, really.
Okay. Well, we'll be talking soon. You know that, like tomorrow. But anyway, I wanted to close out. I just wanted to remind everybody that we have the trivia night link that's actually in the chat session. If you want to scroll back, probably the second entry in the chat session, you'll see a URL right there. That's how you get to it. And I believe Courtney has also sent the Zoom meeting link within the questions. So please look at that and join if you can. I think that would be wonderful, and we appreciate all the support Swidgis is always doing for us. So thanks everyone. We hope you had a great time, and we really are looking forward to doing more of these. And stay tuned. We'll keep you posted. Bye everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.